Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our discussion at the crossroads, people and planet. Can AlUla unlock a sustainable future? We are joined by a panel of eminent experts and scholars to discuss the course and complexities of building a sustainable future. I want to first start off by thanking the Royal Commission of AlUla for hosting a panel of this caliber on a very topical subject. Representing NEOM, I'm delighted and honored to be collaborating with fellow developmental projects in the Kingdom to address and advance our work together in integrated sustainability. Our nation is going through a very exciting time through a period of accelerated development, decarbonization and diversification of the economy, creating a wider scope of economic and employment opportunities, and bolstering Saudi Arabia's social and economic contribution to the global community. Despite the pandemic that has impacted everyone, Saudi Arabia forges ahead. At the same time, we've taken steps to reduce Saudi Arabia's emissions by working to plant 10 billion trees and generate half of our energy for renewables by 2030. Our discussion today is an important one, is of national and global interest. How do we achieve these seemingly divergent goals? Is it possible to unite conservation and development at the same time? New technology and innovation will definitely play a part, but are there lessons to be learned from history? That's something to think about. AlUla is one such region. It's a region which has sustained centuries of trade, social, and cultural development. This is visible in its heritage sites and its local traditions. Today, the same principles of environmental, social, and economic sustainability are driving the circular economy, empowering its local community. What can we draw from the 200,000 years of human history at AlUla to reimagine sustainability, challenge conservational wisdom, and draw inspiration from ancient ingenuity? To help navigate this course, we're joined by 6 visionary experts, thinkers in the field of integrated sustainability. Allow me to introduce the lovely group we have here today. Introductions begin with Matteo Renzi, the former Prime Minister of Italy from the years of 2014 to 2016, Italy, the country in the world with the most UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Then Alejandro Agag, the founder and CEO of Formula E. William McDonough, the architect, founder, author, and global leader in sustainable design and development. Gerard Misterale, Executive Director and Executive Chairman of the French Agency of AlUla's Cultural Heritage and Tourism Development. James Hardcastle, the Director of the IUCN Green List. And last but certainly not least, Carlos Duarte, the Distinguished Professor of Marine Sciences at KAUST and Environmental Sustainability Thought Leader. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you all today. I'll start off with integrated sustainability and carbon neutral. I'll start with you, Bill, if you don't mind. What is integrated sustainability and why is it important?
One of the great things about the concept of sustainability is that it's about intergenerational benefit, and it brings everything together. And we see the multiplier effects of one thing and another. That's the integrated part. So we're integrating the present with the future, the past with the future, integrating culture. We're integrating technology and so on and so forth. They all have relationships that interact. So the important thing is to see this whole set of issues as a kind of ecosystems and organisms. And it's important because everything affects everything else. And the benefits are tremendous. And the recognition of multiplier effects is a key part of it. And so we find the economics work really beautifully. As soon as you start to realize there's benefits coming from lots of directions, as well as just a simple economic venue. And then there's drama that happens when we do something this way, and all of a sudden you realize that something fantastic happened. And we've seen that in business with a giant green roof on a factory, all of a sudden saves $35 million in chemical treatment plants. And that's worth, that's worth huge amounts of resource and gets grace and dignity brought to something relatively simple with magical effects.
Great. Bill, are there examples of some projects that are doing integrated sustainability right now and are having those tangible measurement impact on local communities and environments?
There are, at a very small scale. For example, we did a building in Oberlin, Ohio, in a university, and all of a sudden you have a building that's more powered with renewables than it requires, so it can give energy to its neighbors. Isn't that interesting? A building like a tree. It can purify its own water using natural systems. It has a greenhouse and so on. So all of a sudden, there's a building that is using renewable energy and giving it to its neighbors. It's purifying water. And it's the one building on the campus where students with multiple chemical sensitivity can all study. So it's very popular because it's a safe building. So all of a sudden we see those benefits as a member of a community, a safe place that is actually carbon positive of all things. Also with communities, I'd say the most famous one for me is Curitiba, Brazil, which since 1973 is essentially a city designed around loving its children. And the mayor at the time was Jaime Lerner, an architect. And the city developed its own transportation system. It was like subways above ground. So they made their own buses. They got the jobs. They had a program called Garbage That's Not Garbage. And so all the children learned how to collect things and get rewarded. And they got rewarded with mobility. And they had their own organic gardens in the floodplains so people wouldn't build there, but they could grow organic food, one thing after another. And little libraries all over the cities. The children could all get to libraries without having to go to some central place. I think, to me, it's one of the more exciting ones because it had all the environmental issues, it had all the economic issues, and it had this amazing social issue: was live, work close as you can, and love your children. And everything they looked at was how are we loving our children, including tree planting. So they moved from 5 trees per capita to 50 trees per capita, which was an amazing thing to watch the city turn green too. So
beautiful. I love it when we have all generations get involved in initiative. And this is the perfect initiative to see that in, from the young to the old, all ages, across the whole circular economy from cradle to grave. Everyone wants to be involved in it. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Now, Alejandro, through Formula E, you've successfully created a business and entertainment model which still prioritizes sustainability, which is really amazing. How do you continually balance the two? I know that can be very challenging, and what lessons can be learned from this experience?
I think now the difficulty is not to make compatible sustainability and business. The difficulty is to do a business without having a sustainability angle in your business. So when we started Formula E, this was 10 years ago, we had the idea, and we launched. The first race was in Beijing in September 2014. Everybody thought it was I had an absolute consensus, and the consensus was Formula E will crash and burn. All the motorsport world had this concept. My all-time partner and at the time CEO of Formula One, Bernie Ecclestone, told me when I told him that I was going to do an electric car championship, he said, "You will never make it to your first race." But we did make it to the first race, and today is the championship with more manufacturers in the world, and it has an incredible growth, very strong revenues, very big sponsors, because we were promoting electric cars. And we did it at a time, in 2014, probably electric cars were not as available as now, although still the uptake is not what we would like. But it was only really Tesla at the time really pushing it. Now you see all the big car manufacturers doing it. But we were going on the right direction, and that's what gave the opportunity to the business. And now we are creating the next one, and we're here in AlUla with Extreme E, which is electric SUVs in the most remote corners of the planet. And it's got incredible momentum right from the start because it's focusing on environmental issues. So actually, I think the easiest thing to do is to create a business that has an environmental focus on it and make them compatible. It's what makes sense.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you for that. Matteo, over to you. You contributed a great deal to revitalization of Pompeii and Matera in Italy to transform each of them into vibrant and cultural touristic destinations. And like AlUla, Pompeii and Matera have had a rich human history as well. And in these developments, how do you advance social sustainability and the growth in the tourism sector while also protecting the unique heritage website, sites and cultural landscapes. What lessons can be learned as Saudi Arabia works to advance this in its social and economic sustainability?
Good afternoon. I'm totally agree with Alejandro about the necessity today to invest at the same time in business and in sustainability. It's impossible to do business without sustainability, but exactly the same is true for culture and tourism. And as you said, really, examples as Pompeii and Matera are very exciting example for us. Pompeii is one of the most amazing place around the world, but in the last 25 years, 20 years, 15 years, unfortunately, Italy lost the momentum to invest in a new narrative about Pompeii. Our government decided to involve European Union and created a great project called exactly the Grande Progetto, the big project about Pompeii. And now Pompeii is, unfortunately, 2020 apart, because it's impossible to discuss about tourism with the COVID. Before the last year, before the COVID, Pompeii achieved the maximum of visitors. The same is for Matera. Matera became the capital for culture in Europe after a long period in which a lot of people think about Matera as a place of ruin, a place of disaster. What is the strategy? What is the secret, in my view? Is exactly the way decided from AlUla's Royal Commission of AlUla. Use and valorize a great place, one of the capital of the past, and transform in a place for the future. And in that way, sustainability have to be one of the keys, one of the most important key, because, and that is the most important challenge for me. We live in a world rich of numbers, artificial intelligence, every big data. The real challenge is create places with a soul. And sustainability in AlUla is exactly the key performance to transform a place of the past in a capital of the future. I think that is the great way, and I think that will be a great possibility, not only for AlUla, not only for Saudi, but for everyone to use the place of the past and transform in cities rich of hope and also with a soul for the future. That is a strategy.
Beautiful. I love that. The cities of the past transforming into the future with a soul. That's lovely. I'm going to move on to a really favorite subject of mine, circular economy. And I'm going to come back to you, Bill, if I may. Can you explain the circular, carbon economy? How is it applied here? And are there any challenges and limitations to it?
Well, the circular carbon economy comes for me out of the work we've been doing many years ago. We call cradle to cradle instead of cradle to grave. So we're talking about things that come back. And so that's really, circular economy is moving from a take, make, waste to a take, retake, remake, restore world where we recirculate things. Now, for us, we can see that as the biological world where the materials, especially carbon, go to the atmosphere to create living things. That's the biosphere. And then we have the technosphere, which is the things humans use for intention and use, things we make to hold up our buildings or build roads and so on, equipment. So we have a biosphere and a technosphere. And those two can be in the model of nature, which is one thing's waste is another thing's food. We can do the same with industrial products, where we really want the service of the television, not the ownership of all the chemicals. We really want to make sure that equipment can go back into cycles without contaminating the biosphere. So that's the basis. And that becomes the circular economy of material flows. What has happened, interestingly, and at the G20 in Riyadh starting in March, is that we're able to look at carbon in the circular economies as not just a material to be circulated, but also it's the fuel of the modern industrial system. So now we look at carbon as a material, we start to realize that in nature, it's a key material for living things, of course. But in the technosphere, we've been using it as a fuel, and it comes from the ground and whoosh to the atmosphere, right? So it doesn't cycle the way biosphere does. So we need to understand how to deal with the carbon that we use that creates emissions that are fugitive atmospheric emissions, like to the atmosphere, or fugitive durable emissions like plastics going into the oceans. So carbon in the wrong place. And so what has happened now is that an articulation of the circular carbon economy as an element of the circular economy, which then sees that in order to meet our Paris goals, we need to reduce emissions from current 50 gigatons a year of human emissions by 60% by 2030. 60%. This requires massive efficiency and massive adoption of renewable energy. And we need to encourage natural systems, which do it naturally everywhere, and ecosystem health and plantings, as you point out, all that we want to do, regenerative agriculture, carbon, positive management. And then we also want to deal with technologies that produce renewable energy, that we can start talking about hydrogen, because we can now produce hydrogen with electricity that's very inexpensive in a place like Saudi Arabia, and then work our way into these materials that don't do the emissions of carbon. So that's really the circular carbon economy. It's the circular economies of healthy, safe materials and cycles with the added feature of pay attention to the carbon, because carbon is a source of life, and it's also a source of emissions that we want to change.
Beautiful. If I may just touch one more step beyond that, how do you get that engagement going? How do you get that momentum? You talked about in the beginning, the children were involved in planting trees and gave examples of the whole society being engaged. How do we make that momentum happen?
Well, one of the things I love about AlUla is that it's really a place that's timeless. And so there are many people who are timeful, in a sense, they're in a hurry, and they're mindless. They don't want to think about it. So we have timefully mindless people. Well, when you come to a place like AlUla and you see the sky at night, or you hear, this quiet, you're in a place that's timeless and you become mindful. So I think this has to do with mindfulness and people who are sort of discovering the obvious, which is this is an issue and we can deal with it and we want to deal with it and we want to give our children a world that's better than we find it. So I think the first thing is to translate our values. As the Prime Minister said, we're not looking for statistical significance and number, artificial intelligence. We're actually looking also for wisdom. We're not just trying to be smart, we want to be wise. And we're also looking for natural intelligence and things like that. So there's this ancient place that can inform us of all these things. And so if we start by talking about our values, what do we believe in? What is the right and the wrong, the good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly? Let's start with what's the right thing to do? And then we can go and talk about the right way to do it. Because if all we think about is efficiency and doing the same thing less badly, and we use Six Sigma perfection, we can become perfectly wrong.
Right.
And so it's really a question of what's the right thing to do? What has a soul?
Beautiful.
What has meaning? And then go from there.
I love it. I love it. The whole mindfulness element is beautiful, and just what is the right thing to do? And that really connects to the next question that I have for James, actually, is how do we bring communities on board and balance the interests of protecting natural landscapes against urbanization and the needs of growing communities? How is the balance? And, sort of touching on what Bill just said, what is the right thing to do? What is the right balance?
Thanks, Dr. Hashimi. And really interesting input so far. I think I'll go straight to the similar issue. As Alejandro pointed out, you can't do business without sustainability. And I believe you can't do nature conservation, nature protection without communities. The people who live, who interact, who have that knowledge, who have that soul about a place, they're integral to any kind of successful nature protection, nature conservation, and all the outcomes we desire. And I think it's not doing things right. It's really about doing the right thing. With IUCN, we've set up, with our global members, 160 countries, 20,000 scientists, we've all come together And we've discussed what makes nature conservation effective, especially in areas. So, for example, with Sharan in AlUla and other places in Saudi Arabia, what would make them effective? And the overwhelming response is where places are effective is where you have the full engagement from the start, from the outside of the communities, the people who live and breathe the air, and who don't see those places as wild, but see them part of their heritage. And I think another point back to Signor Renzi made a similar allusion that you can't separate culture either from nature. And I know UNESCO has done that with World Heritage, but they should put it back together again, because nature and culture are hand in hand, and the protection of nature is a cultural phenomenon. With IUCN, we took this kind of findings and we put together a standard, a sustainability standard, that will describe how you achieve success in area-based conservation. And many countries have signed up, many nature reserves, national parks, community conserved areas, indigenous territories, you name it, they're signing up. And they're working towards meeting that standard. And we're giving this independent advice on how you can meet it. And the number one, the entry point of that is about doing the right thing. It's about looking at who has, substantive rights to the place, who should be involved, what are the best ways to involve them in protecting values that are important to them, as well as to, at the global level. And that includes, the climate elements, the carbon. There's more than 200,000 protected areas worldwide. 15 to 20% of our planet already, and those places need to be protected, and they need to be protected effectively. And if you don't protect them effectively, you're losing all that carbon, all that kind of ecosystem value. You're losing it, and that goes to desert systems. I think we'll hear more about later. And so I really think that there are key ways to involve communities, and we'd like to see Saudi Arabia step up. With my organization, Saudi Arabia has been a leader for decades in nature conservation, but recently there's other countries who are adopting this standard as well. In the Middle East region, we'd like to see Saudi Arabia, would like to see AlUla adopt this standard and go towards meeting it. We have places in Italy. Signor Renzi might be pleased to know, Gran Paradiso in Italia is one of our flagship sites. In Spain, all over the world in different places. So we'd really like to see this as an opportunity for AlUla to be the first in Saudi Arabia to achieve this standard as well. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Nice segue into countries, into Saudi Arabia. This is a very exciting time for Saudi Arabia. As I mentioned, not only has His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, promised 10 billion trees to be planted here, but another 40 billion across the Middle East, which is the Middle East Green Initiative. So it's quite an exciting time, and many developmental projects across Saudi Arabia are working on different strategies for sustainability. You see NEOM with green hydrogen, and now we move on to AlUla. And Gerard, if I may, I want to move on to specifically AlUla's zero carbon strategy. How was it developed, and how will it be achieved?
So thank you for your invitation. As executive president of the French Agency for AlUla Development, also known as AlUla, we are co-constructing the AlUla project with the Royal Commission of AlUla. And sustainability, since the very beginning, has always been at the core of the intergovernmental bilateral agreement that the Kingdom and France signed in April 2018 in Paris. Sustainability, resources preservation, local communities are indeed at the heart of the development strategy of this magnificent territory. So as you know, the master plan has been approved last December, by the way, in NEOM, and I was deeply honored to present to the Crown Prince the strategy and vision of AlUla on a zero carbon approach. And this is something that we developed within AlUla with the Royal Commission. So I will say, first of all, that AlUla project aims to be a development role model in the region and for the world. In fact, building and operating a sustainable AlUla aligns with KSA's Vision 2030, responds also to local population expectations, and will offer an attractive response to tourists and visitors environmental aspirations. Clearly, they want a green tourism. And so AlUla has to deal with that. So sustainability has been an overarching criterion for the development of the master plan and has found its translation throughout its 12 strategic principles endorsed by William MacDonald, and that I fully support. So building a best-in-class project with respect to sustainability dimensions clearly asks for developing appropriate metrics. We need metrics converting qualitative ambitions into quantitative assessments. Carbon emissions and carbon footprint are meaningful metrics for such purpose. So AlUla will rely on a scientific methodology driven by a capacity to measure the carbon emission over time, carbon emission of each part of the project, and during all the construction. We'll have also to deploy relevant levels of decarbonation, considering all sources of emissions, local and global, which is perhaps relatively new. The local emissions are the power, electricity consumed, the diesel for the transport, air conditioning. But the global emissions comes from the airlines emissions, from the tourists, for example, also the emissions from imported goods and imported food. So we have clearly to be creative in the types of levers used. And so AlUla and RCU are conducting all these works supported by the McKinsey engineers in France and in Saudi Arabia.
Great. Well, thank you for that. You touched on some very important points about the thirst for green tourism in the kingdom. And that is a nice bridge to my next question for Bill and Matteo, is how do you view Saudi Arabia's role in the global sustainability agenda? What role will all of the oil-producing countries play? And what role should they be playing? So this is for both Bill and Matteo.
This is such an important question. And we have to reflect back on the comments by Sheikh Yamani in 1973 in London when they started OPEC. And somebody asked him, when do you think we'll see the end of the age of oil? And his response was, I don't know that we ever will, but I can tell you the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. So the oil age won't end because we run out of oil. The question is, what are we doing with all these things? So I think the resource-rich countries in terms of hydrocarbons are going to be, to meet their emission targets, are going to be focusing on, for example, synthetic chemistries, where we can take these materials, use them to make things that are durable and useful, rather than burning them. I think the basic point is let's stop burning it. And so we also will see, as we've already started in Saudi Arabia, the production of blue hydrogen, for example, where we can take natural gas and use the hydrogen and then sequester the carbon. So all of a sudden, we're able to ship ammonia to Japan and have hydrogen-powered Japan, which is their plan. And all of a sudden, you see astonishing thing, which is we're shipping renewable energy if we use green hydrogen, which we can do at NEOM, as you pointed out. And if we can ship green hydrogen to Japan, this is the first time in history we're seeing the shipping of renewable energy over massive distances. What an astonishing thing. And so I think that's really what it's about. We connect in the world community and we look, for example, the Europeans who all want hydrogen, and we can say, great, we'd like to give you green hydrogen and give us an order for green hydrogen, and we'll give you an order for electrolyzers because we need the equipment to make the hydrogen. So all of a sudden, instead of just policies, we're actually doing purchase orders. And so the future is about renewable power and clean power. And then these resources below the ground, we can call them sources. We actually want to turn them into resources. not liabilities in the atmosphere. So we can call them resources in the circular economy. And we use them again and again and again.
Very exciting. Thank you. Matteo, are you?
Okay, I believe that is an unbelievable moment for the life of the planet, because of course we are in a very strong period for COVID, pandemic, etc. But that is also the time of a radical transformation for sustainability, for energy, and in general for the quality of our transition. So the leaders around the world understood that when in 2015 in Paris, they signed a very important agreement about climate change. I believe the Saudi's leadership with the idea of Middle East Green Initiative launched, as you said, from Crown Prince, is one of the pillars for the area, because there is not simply, it's not simply simple, but there is not simply 10 billion of new trees with a very ambitious goal, but there is this knowledge. We don't have the possibility to continue with the traditional investment in oil and gas. And for Saudi, that is an historical transformation. Diversify the idea of development of the future. Invest in Niam, in AlUla, in also in the transformation of Riyadh, in the other cities. Have that as a key point. We cannot continue with the idea with oil and gas, we will save the economy. Economy is very important if Saudi will be able to diversify. That is the strategy of Kingdom. And I think that is particularly important because all the world in the next years will change. Bill spoke about OPEC in 1970s. I think we will have in the next 12 months a lot of great changes. I don't know what could happen between Russia and China. Europe have to come back. USA come back in the Paris Agreement. And I believe the Middle East Green Initiative could be a great asset for the strategy of all the area. Of course, that is particularly challenging in a country rich of young people, because there is in the young people a great importance for sustainability, and there is also the great vision. And for a leader, it's important to have funding. This is clear everywhere, but it's not a problem in Saudi. And vision. Middle East Green Initiative is a part of vision, very, very interesting, and I hope that will show some results in the next years, not in the next decades.
Agreed. It's a very exciting time. I get so super excited actually that if they take this initiative, it talks about the rippling effect, the sort of the momentum where everyone's engaged, everyone wants to be involved. It's exciting. You see it all over. And like you said, the youth is super excited about it. So it adds another intensity to it. So it's quite an exciting time for this amazing subject, which it's close to heart for many. And on that topic, Alejandro, I want to ask you, you're in AlUla at the moment, and for a very exciting race for Extreme E, an off-road electric SUV race. How do you manage a race of this scale and offset damage to the environment at the same time? So you keep the excitement and you keep the sustainability all united.
Yes, so obviously a race is a rather big operation. And you have to do many things to make it as sustainable as possible. And we have Mr. Mestrayer looking at us, making sure that we do the zero carbon plan here in AlUla, which we do our best. Zero carbon is difficult to obtain, obviously, because even if we breathe in the morning, we emit some carbon, but we can minimize it. So we, for example, in the event, we call the event the race with no trace. When we leave, you cannot see we've been there. Of course, that's not enough. We charge our cars, electric cars, with green hydrogen. So we carry around the world these fuel cells that we are going to actually prove that they can charge cars in the Arctic, in the Amazon rainforest, in Patagonia, near Dakar, in the Lagos, and here in AlUla. And also we carry them with our ship. We have the Santa Elena, where I was with Professor Duarte, Carlos Duarte. We had some fantastic days on the Red Sea where we did this beach restoration project of sea turtles in Ras Baridi. By carrying all our cars and all our infrastructure by sea, we already reduced by 2/3 the emissions that we would have if we would carry around the world this by plane. Having said that, there are emissions. We are a race. Once we minimize everything we can, the rest we offset with projects, with our own projects. We're planting 1 million mangroves, for example, in Senegal. We're reforesting areas in the Amazon near the place where we raise and so on. But offsetting is kind of the last resort after trying to minimize as much as you can through the logistics and through everything else, the footprint of the race. But when we leave AlUla and you go to Wadi Rum, to the area where we are, just beyond the Sahari Hotel, you will not see that we've been there.
Amazing, amazing. That's super cool. Carlos, a question for you. As a part of the Journey Through Time Master Plan, the World Commission of AlUla is planning the world's largest cultural oasis regeneration project. And 60% of the oasis is abandoned today due to lack of water and unsustainable farming practices. But through research and innovative solutions from water management to irrigation and land use, the master plan kicks off an intense replenishment of this cultural oasis. How does such regeneration projects contribute to the carbon neutrality and the reduction of emissions?
So thank you, Maya, for the question. And in fact, you brought one new word to the conversation, which I think is very important, which is regeneration. And Bill started the round of discussions indicating that AlUla is a timeless place. And you can make somewhere in the earth a timeless place if you keep a contract between generations, which is you hand over the next generation a better world than you found. And that contract has been broken over the last 2 generations, where I believe our generation and the former generation understood that the better world was a better world where we grow the technosphere, but we have grown the technosphere and we have more cars, we have more TVs, we have more buildings, but we have done that at the expense of depleting the biosphere. So what we need to do is to regenerate the biosphere. And this is a step beyond sustainability. So it's not about sustain and conserve. Now the challenge is about regenerate. And we can rebuild the contract with the future generations by aspiring at a regenerative biosphere. So I think that Bill and I concur on that we need to create a circular technosphere about regenerative biosphere, and that's key. So we need to go even one step beyond net zero, and we actually need to be positive. We need to aspire for positive impact on the biosphere, rebuilding the abundance of life, and all of the elements, including water, that support life. So the project of regenerating 65% of the oasis in AlUla is about rebuilding that intergenerational contract that kept AlUla a vibrant place for tens of thousands of years. So we can do it again. And in doing that, we can reestablish the way we operate and reconcile it with the laws of nature and the way nature operates. And that includes creating carbon stocks in the soils that contribute to climate change mitigation and avoiding the concept of waste. And now the concept of waste is actually also being rethought. And Bill mentioned cradle to cradle, where something waste is someone else's food. And just imagine that extreme e-cars, actually the waste they produce is actually water, which is what's missing in AlUla. So no longer the cars should produce toxic fumes, greenhouse gases, and particulates that impact negatively on human health. Extremist cars actually produce water. So water is what has been missing in AlUla because of excess of use of the groundwater. So the regeneration of AlUla and the oasis is a step in the right direction of our regenerative biosphere. And I'm delighted to see contributions in the master plan, but also extremely, as Alejandro mentioned, is going to engage with the community on a citrus planting program and rebuilding, reforesting with trees, acacia trees, but also crop trees is an important driver towards carbon sequestration, and also the management of soils can contribute hugely to mitigate climate change. So I think it's time to abandon the concept of sustainability as one which is to just neutrality for carbon, for water, for life. And we need to strive at a regenerative sustainability that reveals the abundance of life and the abundance of elements that supports life.
Beautiful. Very interesting. And just on the subject of water, and this question is for you, Carlos, again, but also James. So much of the water we consume is embedded in food. And what is, to you, the sustainable diet? And how can that also contribute to the use of sustainability and to use sustainable use of water resources?
Thank you. That's actually a very important question because there's a huge debate and a huge push in, what my opinion, the wrong direction. Because we need to start thinking about what is a healthy diet, and then next, how we make that sustainable. So the World Health Organization recommends that human health depends on an adequate balanced intake of protein and hydrocarbons and minerals and vitamins from both vegetable and animal origin. And in particular, a sufficient supply of seafood is fundamental for our health, our mental health, and also women's reproductive health. So I think the idea that we need to abandon eating food or seafood, striving to a sustainable future, is actually going in the wrong direction, because it's going to make us unhealthy, and it's going to create a proliferation of problems of mental health, which are a mounting problem in Western and modern populations. So let's start with what is a healthy diet, and then how we make it sustainable. So a healthy diet needs to have all of those components. Now we need to produce food in a sustainable manner, and there's ways in which we can improve or lower the resources required to produce food. For instance, now at the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, where I work, we are working on a desert agricultural program where we are able to grow food with increasing amounts of seawater. So very soon we should be able to grow vegetables with full strength seawater, and therefore the footprint of food production in terms of consumption of fresh water will be hugely reduced. We can also use microbes to help plants improve the water economy in a circular manner, so that they don't act as pump of water, and the water requirement to produce food is also reduced. And also we need to produce food locally. So that's why rebuilding the oasis of AlUla is an important step towards a sustainable provision of food for the region and the population there.
A subject close to my heart as a health person. I couldn't agree more with you. I'd love to hear from you, James, as well, if you have more.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just briefly. I mean, I think food is a wonderful topic, especially around this time in the evening. So always good, as local as possible. And what we see in many of our most successful nature conservation areas is this interaction with local culture, local food, local growth, sustainability, always going local. And I think that I'd just like to pick up a little bit on the topics of health as well. And this regeneration, and many of our nature conservation areas are actually on the borders or next to urban settlements, cities. I mean, AlUla, you have Sharan. You know, worldwide, you have really important nature conservation areas next to cities. And during this time, and Gerard, at least you had your birthday yesterday, I believe, and today, okay, you're locked down, but you know, people need the small chances to get outside, to move around, to get into nature. That is so fundamental for mental health as well. So again, this focus on what is there locally, and how we can connect that, how we can advertise, how we can support that those places are accessible, that the services they provide are maintained. That is so important. And so I'd just like to just reflect on what Alejandro, you mentioned kind of the last resort is the offset. And, you know, it's really exciting. I have my Formula E hat I just put on as well. I'm a big fan. But you know, there's a lot more that could be done rather than waiting at the end to then offset. Is actually almost preemptive to say, okay, look, you know, we're racing in cities, for example, in Marrakesh or Marseille or wherever it is. There are nature conservation areas on the doorstep that need support, that aren't being managed effectively, that could really do with the promotion of the race, the excitement, some kind of connection to advertise these sites as places that you are supporting, that people should support to connect with the tourism. And you know, rather than looking at the offset at the end, maybe something preemptive to support these areas. You know, I know several conservation areas in the Amazon. There's one of our green list ones that's managed by the indigenous people themselves. It's one of the most successful nature conservation areas on the planet. These places are there, but they need support. So something maybe preemptive, I think, would be useful. But I just want to just a final, you know, just on that focus on health, nature conservation areas, the whole kind of sustainability. We need these green spaces. We need them in cities. We need them next to cities. Super important. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Gerard, back to you. AlUla is a region with over 50,000 inhabitants. How do you see the application of circular economy in AlUla? How will that impact the lives of the local community? And how do we ensure sustainable resource management?
Yes, okay. Clearly, the circular economy is very important everywhere. In my previous life, I launched my 2 companies, Suez Energy, in that direction. We aim at AlUla at maximizing the value of the materials that circulate. There is a target of 60% of recycled goods within the economy, and also to promote energy efficiency. The source of energy will be solar, of course, but also there is in Sharan a geothermal project, which is very, very important to be renewable. So AlUla wants to become a role model in terms of circular economy, enhancing the recycling of goods, the change of the consumption habits of the local population. For example, in water use, water in agriculture, there is a huge change to introduce. And also for the tourist. So AlUla will adopt innovative norms concerning water use, waste management, agriculture, and building materials. A few words on that. AlUla and ACU are really at the forefront of this matter. There is also a question of innovation, and we need to innovate all the time. Carbon emission measure and abatement levels are giving a framework to serve this purpose. We should, for example, promote local production of goods and building materials, favor the reduction of the volumes of waste generated, imposing more sobriety, rationalize the use of water in private and public facilities and agriculture. The promotion of a local building construction branch is very important. We are working on that because we have to create also a kind of local industry to use locally the building materials, which will be used for the 10,000 hotel rooms and hotels, the museum which will have to be built. Most of the building construction materials will have to be constructed and produced locally. It concerns the stone. As you know, there is, for example, the red sandstone in AlUla, which is really beautiful. Mud and earth. We have to renew the methods for the earth construction as it used to be in the past, for example, in the old city in AlUla. Also the wood construction. As you know, there are 2 million palm trees in AlUla, in the Wadi, in the oasis, and 30,000 trunks of palm trees are available and burnt today. We can also, of course, use those strengths for the construction, wood construction. So there is a large field for innovation, creating jobs for local population, and the material and energy recovery of organic agriculture waste, for example, the palm leaves, offers also a large field of innovation. So I am relatively optimistic that the circular economy will be very good, very positive for the 50,000 inhabitants of AlUla.
Amazing. Well, I hope Saudi Arabia can become a benchmark for the world for circular economy. It's the cradle to cradle concept is something that's so amazing and interesting. Love to see that effect ripple across the Middle East. Alejandro, you've worked to raise awareness of climate change and bring the topic of sustainability to new audiences, which is amazing. How successful has that approach been? What other sports, activities, or even industries do you think can adopt a similar measure in the future around this topic?
Before I go that one, to answer to James, because he's totally right, and actually on Extreme, we're just doing that. We're going preemptive. We're engaging with local organizations in every place where we raise, and we're looking for projects to support. We have a scientific committee where we are so lucky to have as one of our members of the scientific committee, Professor Carlos Duarte, another 4 scientists that check those projects and look for also new ideas and new research that we can do on the 5 locations where we raised, and from the Santa Elena, the vessel that goes around the world. So definitely, James, that's I mean, you're completely right, and we're already doing that. And you know, the objective, and being brief, it's for Extreme is to bring as many people and as many corporations on this journey towards a more sustainable activity. We have a bit of a different philosophy because we are not an environmental organization. And I am particularly not a believer in dividing people into good and bad when we talk to climate action. You know, I think people like Extinction Rebellion, for example, have a role to play. I don't agree with their solutions, but they do raise awareness. But they take the liberty, which is something I don't think is right, to say that some people are good and some people are bad. I think everyone can take a contribution. And I always give extreme example that you know, we were discussing recently. Aramco is the biggest oil company in the world, but it's investing a lot on carbon capture. What if the biggest company in the world cracks the carbon capture technology, makes it affordable, and starts taking direct from the air carbon capture and solves the CO2 problem in the atmosphere? Wouldn't that be contradictory? I don't think so. I think everyone should play a role, and through sport. And you know, 24 of the 25 most watched programs ever in TV were sports. So sports has an incredible power. So through sport, in Extreme, in Formula E, and in other sports, we have the opportunity to bring businesses and industries on our direction, and we are very happy if we can do that. Formula E has been quite successful, I have to say. 9 big car manufacturers and 25 plus big corporations around the world, from our title sponsor ABB to many, many others. And in Extreme, we're a young startup now. Well, our first race is tomorrow. I'm a bit nervous, but we start tomorrow, and hopefully we will be able to do the same.
If I may, I would like to add
Absolutely.
one comment about this. A specific comment is that 2 days ago, I was in the beach of Ras Baridi, which is about 3 hours away from AlUla, and I was accompanied there by 3 Formula One champions and several rally champions, Dakar champions, Carlos Sainz, Jenson Button, Nico Rosberg, and many others. And what we were doing there was actually starting a project on turtle conservation, because this is the most important rookery for sea turtles in the Red Sea, and is threatened by sea level rise. So we were there in the beach, not only collecting the plastic litter that was in the beach, but also initiating a project brought together by Extreme and also Prince Ba Foundation to engage on the range of actions that are required to secure a future for the turtles, not only in that coastal area, but in the whole of the Red Sea. So I think that for me, the evidence of the power of bringing sports with conservation and climate action together is very, very tangible.
I couldn't agree more. Just even the example that Alejandro said about the Saudi Aramco, just bringing countries like the oil-producing countries to be engaged in such an initiative in itself is an example of the type of engagement we can get on a, from the top down level and bottom up. This is amazing, and that causes the momentum and rippling effect as well. I'd like to conclude our amazing and really inspiring discussion with one final question for you, Matteo, if I may. You've pursued multiple initiatives to further environmental sustainability in your time as a Prime Minister. You signed the Paris Climate Accord on behalf of Italy. What are the most important structural changes that need to be put in place to advance climate change agendas, and how can this be done in a region like AlUla and at large like Saudi Arabia?
Good question, and it's not easy to have an answer. I believe that when I sign as Italian Prime Minister the Paris Agreement, my hands trembles because I felt the importance of that signature. But there is not, in my view, a single act who could change the situation. I think the real priority today is change the mind, change the mentality. And I think AlUla could be a perfect and amazing example about it. Because we grew up with an idea. Culture is important, but more important is economy. Our generation grew up with the idea the Minister of Economy is important. The Minister of Culture is Minister of not so important matters. That was in 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Then the people understand how is important culture. There is a great Russian writer who was Fyodor Dostoevsky, who used that words, beauty will save the world. Culture will save the world, because we understood after how is important the great value of culture. Now, the real challenge for us is try to make one more step, and is that beautiful will save the world, culture will save the world, but sustainability is a part of this beauty. Sustainability is a part of that culture, and that is true in AlUla. AlUla is one incredible place, is one of the most amazing places around the world. And please, I was mayor of Florence, so I have a little expertise about beautiful and incredible places. I think AlUla have everything for that. The real challenge for the future is not simply reduction of emission, good. Invest in sustainability, good. Protect the microclimate, good. Everything is good. But the real challenge is change the mind. And in that challenging, I think to be able to combine together beauty and culture, sustainability and economy is the very way to guarantee the agreement of Paris, but I think guarantee a future for our son and I believe next generation. That is the strategy, that is the challenge, and I'm sure AlUla could play a role in that direction.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for such an intriguing and exciting discussion. In the words of Bill, let's do the right thing. And this gives us a lot of fruit for mindfulness and further thinking of how we can act and make this change happen faster and further. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. It was a pleasure to connect with all of you. Thank you.